And we're back. So we are in for another day working on the cylinder heads. Made a little bit of progress, also had some interesting setbacks. A lot has happened, so we'll catch you up. So in the last episode, we were basically to the point of getting the cylinder heads bolted on. We've got the surfaces fully cleaned. We cleaned out the insides of the bores, the tops of the pistons, made sure everything was ready to go, squeaky clean. Got the gaskets in place. And we actually got so far as to resting the cylinder heads on, and that was where we wrapped it. But then James made an incredible discovery. He actually found an incredibly rare item which we never expected to come across. Secretly, the whole time during this project, we've been hunting for a set of long tube headers for this thing. They basically never actually made them in any sort of mass production sense, but several small shops made 1 or 2 pairs each and sold them either to an individual buyer or maybe just used it on a shop car. But there was just never a market for them 10 years ago. The type of people that were buying this car really did not care to do the work and spend the money. It was like $1,800 or something at the time for a set of long tube headers for these. So obviously they never took off. And from what I can find, there may be like 10 sets of these long tubes in the world, and they're all different. So imagine our surprise when literally the day that we rest those cylinder heads on, James comes across a car being parted out that had a lot of performance modifications on it, and just so happened to have a set of these long tubes on the car. The guy's parting out all of these performance mods. James reaches out and manages to secure a set of long tube headers. Now with the head off like this, it doesn't look too bad. But again, with the head on, you can see just how perfectly these headers have to run. There's so little clearance in there. And that's why it's so important to get ones that were already on a car like that, where you know it's gonna clear everything. So again, these things are like unobtainium, and it was absolutely a miracle to come across them. So that's why we paused where we did, because it'd be way easier to just pull the heads back off and basically install them and then put the heads in and bolt it all together kind of in situ. But as of this time, this story is appearing that it may not have a happy ending. As of right now, we paid for them. Basically, the guys had the money. Said on multiple occasions that they've shipped. We've asked for tracking. We've asked for some sort of follow-up, a picture of them in the box with the label on it, something where we could get some proof that they shipped. And every time he keeps just saying, oh, I'll get it to you later today, and just nothing. And now has kind of stopped answering our responses, is basically just sort of ghosted us. So we're now to the point of believing that we might be out a handful of money, and we may never get those long tubes. And as much as they were a very good deal, it is still a good chunk of money, so that really sucks. But to keep this build series going, we are actually going to continue with putting the original manifolds back on. So I've got everything set up here on the bench, and we'll walk you through what we're going to do. So we've got our cylinder head here upside down on the bench itself. And we have our exhaust manifold gasket here, which is this metal looking piece. We've also got the correct original manifold here. Woohoo! And all of the exhaust manifold bolts. Now normally myself, I'd clean all these up and blah, blah, blah. To be frank, you physically cannot see these from any angle, and they work fine, so I don't feel like spending an hour cleaning all these up for something you'll literally never see when I have no way of even cleaning that up, which is what they bolt on, so it is what it is. So, if you're a little confused about these gaskets, because they are very uniquely shaped, there's a relatively easy way to understand which way around they go, so you can figure out which one goes on which side, and I'll show you that now. So again, bearing in mind that the cylinder head is upside down at the moment, this is the bottom surface that we're looking at, and on the left here is the front, right? This is our coolant crossover right here, and of course this is the back, and this would be the top, right? So, with your gasket, you'll notice you have this kind of shape to it. You have the flat surface there, and then this sort of angled one. Now that angled one is essentially what is going to go towards the top of the cylinder head. And you'll see it kind of follows the contour of the head, how those bolt little flanges kick out there. And then you'll also notice this little boxed in section here, you want that to go towards the front of the cylinder head. It makes sense if you think about it, because if it went towards the back, the exhaust manifold would just crash right into it. So that helps you orient and make sure you've got the right exhaust manifold gasket on the correct side. The other thing to keep in mind is that, counterintuitive, but these actually swing upward. So the log part of the manifold sits above the flanges. So again, think about orientation. these actually are going to sit below the log part of the manifold. And then the other easy way to tell which side is which, obviously, is just to compare the flanges to what's left in the car. The flange is different on each one of these, so we know that this is the passenger side one. And also it has the EGR on it, which is where the passenger side, the EGR kicks over to the passenger side. So we know this is correct for the one we're working on. So I'm going to work on getting this kind of finger tight and everything like that, and then we're basically going to get it all torqued down. And I should note that even though I didn't ask them to, the cylinder head shop actually looks like they prepped the exhaust manifold surfaces. That's nice. All right, we have our assembly loosely together. So we have the gasket in place. And again, this also acts as a heat shield, which is why you have this here. And these are all just finger tight at the moment. I've just kind of threaded them in. So we're gonna just nip them down to where they touch with the little power ratchet. We are gonna go slow because we're working into an aluminum head. That's mostly just because I'm lazy and don't feel like hand doing it. As soon as they touch, we're gonna move over and use a torque wrench, and we'll start to actually torque them down. All right, so we have that basically just, nipped up, but not done to torque just yet. It does take a couple goes around because the gasket is multi-layered. It'll kind of settle in each time. So just work your way around until it's kind of pinned in place. So the torque spec on this is kind of interesting. There's not much information out there, and it seems that there's potentially conflicting information in the actual manual. The best answer I've come up with, somewhere probably about like 18 to 20 foot-pounds of torque for these bolts. Please don't use me as a reliable source on this. Again, this is just the best approximation that I've found from other people's information online. But that's what I'm going to be doing mine to. And of course, if anything goes wrong, we will report back to you, but seems pretty good to me. And now that we're on the phase of torquing these down, I'm going to kind of start from the center out. So, I'll work from these middle ones and then work outward. I think that's probably our best bet. And it looks like we may actually have to do multiple rounds of this. I kind of want to get partway up to that torque. Yeah, looks like you may end up having to do one more round like this before it clicks. So I'm going to do that now, and we'll come back to it and get these on the final torque in the next round. All right, so I did one round from the center out, just getting them that little bit tighter. And now hopefully this will be the final torque, again, from the center out. There we go. All right, there we have it. So we have the full assembly together now. So we just need to basically take this over to the car and drop it in place. Once it's resting on the dowels, I'm going to do the same treatment to the driver's side cylinder head. I don't really need to show you that because it's going to be exactly the same thing, and there's only one exhaust gasket left, so we know it's the correct one. So I'm going to knock that out, and hopefully we'll have these both resting in place here in just a moment. All right, so we have both gaskets resting in place. Like I said, we got the MLS head gasket here. We have the new exhaust manifold gasket resting in place there. And we put a little bit of WD-40 on these threads and inside of the threads down there as well, just to help us with getting that tightened back up easy. So now it's time to bring the whole assembly over and put it in place. And there we go. The head is in place. So for the time being, I've just done a couple turns with one head bolt just in case. Because now that we have the manifold on and some extra variables in play, you just don't want this thing to risk popping off and sliding and damaging the head or the gasket. So that'll stop it from moving too bad. So now we're going to move on to do the other side. And like movie magic, ta-da! It is now off. And as if by magic, both heads are in. Driver's side was a little trickier as far as the exhaust manifold flange when compared to the passenger side, because we didn't have those convenient studs to just rest the gasket on, and we also have the heat shields that we took off in the last episode. So the method we figured out, definitely a two-person job, was basically to get the cylinder head somewhat in place, close to in place, and then tuck the little heat shield that goes down the side here in sort of with the gasket. So you're kind of, it's still loose, but you want it to go in with the, the flange of the exhaust manifold and at least get pretty close. As long as you get that in at the same time and then kind of seat this down on the dowels, you could then, we put one bolt in just with a couple turns finger tight to stop this from potentially sliding off. Then I went under the car and slid the actual gasket itself up between the two layers, while James basically kind of lifted and took the pressure off on the head to allow it to slide into place. And then basically he just threaded one bolt in up here just to pin it in place. Then I came back in and I put the heat shield in place down the side, the little mount up top that does the other heat shield on top, and those are just started. They're not even finger tight. They're basically just the first couple turns are done. And the same on the other side, because we want to basically torque the cylinder heads down first before doing those. And of course, I just mentioned torquing the cylinder head bolts down. So this is definitely a process that is not to be trifled with. It's something to be done exactly right, and there's a very specific process to follow. I've done a lot of research, and I've found a relatively concise series of information that seems to reference this exact setup, and I'll walk you through what it is. Now, as you can see, we've just got all the bolts resting in here, except for the one where we've just got a couple turns on it. My reading says that because these are torque to yield bolts, you do not specifically need lubrication. If anything, they're designed to be done dry. I have not found something specific that says you need to lubricate the threads, lubricate the undersurface, anything like that. Most of what I've been reading says that the manufacturers, when they design torque to yield bolts, design them to go in dry. So that's what we will be doing. Again, I did make sure that the threads, like the holes in the block, were thoroughly cleaned out to the best of my ability, because obviously any debris or stuff in there will affect the torque of these bolts. So make sure you don't just whip new bolts in there and forget to clean those out, because you'll very quickly, either bind, or you might have something at the bottom to where it's not seating the whole way down. So it's very important to get those cleaned out. So the sequence on these is very important, and you're going to follow the sequence with every round of torquing. There are multiple torque steps that you're going to hit. So you're going to start with 1, then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And you have to go in that series every time. So first step is basically just hand tight, following that exact pattern. Then you're going to go to 15 foot-pounds, again, following that same pattern. Then you're going to go to 26 foot-pounds, following that same pattern. After that, you're going to do a 90-degree turn. So once you've got to 26 foot-pounds, you do 90 degrees. Same, following that pattern. And then you do one more round of 90 degrees. So remember, 2 rounds of 90 degrees. They don't give a specific torque spec, but that is how these were designed to work. So again, 15, 26, 90 degrees, an additional 90 degrees. Once you've done that, following that pattern each time, you're then going to do each of these bolts finger tight, 1 and 2, and then you're going to go to 18 to 20 foot-pounds on each one. And there, I just saved you like an hour and a half worth of research. So the head bolts themselves are a T60. If you're using the type like I am, which is the type you should be using, they are a T60. I'm going to put just a little bit of lubricant on this just to make sure this comes out cleanly. You don't want to get it stuck in there because it'll be a little tight to get that out. But yeah, so we're going to start this process, and I'm going to get these things hand tight right now. So I have gone around in the sequence and run into another issue. There's always an issue. This bit that I just showed you, the T60, is actually too shallow. So this is not deep enough because we are dealing with these little guys right here. And obviously you want to be real careful not to like mash something hardened like this up against that edge. So I've basically just got these as far as I can without letting this touch here, but I'm going to need to get a deeper T60 before I can proceed on. So we're going to stop for today, but at least we have all of the gaskets in, bolts are all kind of resting in place. So next session is basically going to be a series of torquing and locking everything in place and going from there. There's always something, but you got to keep reminding yourself. It's going to be worth it at the end. All right, we are back, and we have the new T60 bit. And so obviously I got a longer one here. This one had a lot of good reviews on Amazon. A lot of people used it for head bolts. There were some other ones I looked at that were, you know, potentially a little better deal, but a lot of bad reviews about them, like twisting off, you know, like the bit itself rounding or the bolts rounding. Kind of shied me away from that. So this one had very good reviews. A lot of people successfully used it for their BMW and also some diesel head bolts. And I figured, why not? This would be perfect for the Jag. Now, as you can see, this thing is very much a long boy. And I was like, okay, well, this is good because, you know, it'll get down in there and there won't be any issue with it reaching. There was something I didn't think about because I ordered this in a separate location from the car, and that is this. This rear bottom bolt on both sides is going to be a challenge with these guys in the way. Now, don't do what I did. Don't buy a crazy 6-inch long one of these. If you can get your hands on one that's maybe about 2 to 3 inches long, it'll be a lot easier. You won't have to do what I'm about to do. Always something. Got to make extra work for myself. I'm going to spare you guys the boring parts because, again, you're not really going to have to do this if you're smart and don't buy a crazy long one like me. But essentially, I'm just removing the hardware that holds this plastic shroud in place. I'm hoping I can leave everything attached to it and just sort of move it out of the way enough. It'd be really good if I didn't have to take all this mess out because that's a nightmare. And then same deal on that side. So I'm going to just knock through that and I will catch you guys up on how that goes. And I'm also going to have to remove this guy and just move him out of the way as well. Okay, that was incredibly irritating, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. So definitely make sure you get a shorter T60 than me, because it was really not fun. So as you can see, we have the shields now removed from both sides. That side wasn't so bad, it was very accessible, but with all the nonsense, all the frickin' reservoir, the pumps, the frickin' solenoids, all that bolting to the shield itself, there was a ton of little nuts that you had to remove. And then there's like one nut here. There's a bolt right down there, which is like almost impossible to reach. 2 bolts here. So yeah, definitely don't do that. But now we can move on to the torque sequence. So again, several rounds. You're doing 16 foot-pounds first, followed by 25 foot-pounds, followed by a 90-degree turn, followed by another 90-degree turn. And you do the pattern that we showed you previously for each cylinder head. So we are going to do that now. And these things will be done. All right, so if it is your first time using a torque wrench, like this is brand new, I've not used it on anything before, it's always a good idea just to test and make sure it works. So with the first round for 16 foot-pounds, I used a different torque wrench because this one doesn't go that low. Admittedly, it's one that has been known to be a little flaky, so I tested on another bolt just to make sure it did click at 16 pounds. It did, so we've done the pattern, we've got everything down to 16 pounds. But what I usually do, and I'll show you, is basically with a brand new one like this, just to make sure it clicks at 25 foot-pounds, is test it on something safe. So for me, we're gonna test it on this little brace right here that holds the bumper. So we know 25 foot-pounds isn't gonna hurt this bolt. And here we go. There we go, click. So we know that this will click at 25 foot-pounds. Good torque wrench. So 20 more clicks, 20 90s, and 20 more 90s, and that's the main head bolts done. Then we just got the 2 front ones on each side, and the cylinder heads are on. All right, that's the last round of clicks. So now we have to basically move on to doing the first series of 90-degree turns. So our solution to this, to make sure we're accurate as possible, is, see if we can get this thing to focus here. There we go. We've put a stripe at the top center of every single bolt head. So basically with the first turn, we want it to end up on the right side, 90 degrees from there. And we'll do the full round just like we did. And then we're gonna come back, and on the second one, that stripe should be bottom dead center. So that will let us know that we've successfully made our first 90, then our second 90. Probably sounds stupid, but that torque wrench is pretty heavy, and leaning over the fender, I'm already starting to get a little worn out. So we're gonna knock through this and get it done. And that's what it should look like after the first 90. I think it just needs a nudge more, but you can see what I'm talking about. Boy, am I glad I bought the big torque wrench. The leverage on that was crazy, but got them done. It gets a little bit freaky, to be honest, the amount of torque you're putting on these things, going into an aluminum block, stuff like that. But it behaved, and they are done. So as you can see now, after our second round of 90 degrees, The line is at the bottom. So that is the main bolt sequence done. All of them are like that on both sides. So the last ones are these front guys right here. All right, so with those cylinder head bolts torqued up, we basically did the front 2 bolts as well on each head. You start with the inside one on each side, so kind of the higher up one first, and then you do the lower one, and that goes to 17 to 20 foot-pounds. So those are done up now as well. And we also decided to tighten up the exhaust manifold flanges where they attach to the cats, as we have the most access to that possible right now. So that was nice and easy. I got one more thing I'm going to do on the driver's side, which is get that little heat shroud that was really a pain in the neck to get off. I'm going to put that in place now as well while we have some extra space. Then we move on to basically the little bucket thingies that go on top of the valves. I've completely forgotten the name of them right now, but I will be showing you what I am doing to get those back in and kind of ready to rock. So as I mentioned in a previous part of this series, these are all labeled conveniently so I know exactly which location they came out of. So for instance, DE1, that means driver's side, exhaust, and 1 being the frontmost. They are a little bit grubby, so I'm basically just going to clean them up with a lint-free cloth and some parts cleaner. Once they are clean, and I'm going to go one by one, cleaning them, drying them, we are then going to dunk them in a little bit of oil here, and then place them in their home. Now, basically the little gray dot you see on the end of the valve itself there is some assembly lube, and that should make sure that everything is nice and lubricated for the first run, because obviously you just don't want this thing to run dry at all. So yeah, we're trying to keep any metal-to-metal surfaces lubricated right out of the gate. All right, that was a pretty straightforward process. So essentially, exactly as described, just cleaned the little bucket guys, soaked them in the oil, kind of made sure it contacted everywhere outside and inside on them, and then dropped them into place. And I have to say, it is an amazing feeling having clean cylinder heads with clean oil, fresh bolts, everything looking good. So I've been cleaning up the cams themselves. As you probably saw, there was a little bit of rust on them from where they had sat. Basically, I've just used a clean microfiber cloth and some brake cleaner, and just been wiping as much of it off as I can to try and get it as smooth and flat as possible without compromising the strength of the lobes. I'm not sourcing new cams for this thing. It's incredibly hard to find ones for the supercharged cars, and even if you do, I just feel like they haven't worn into the cylinder heads, all that stuff. It's just a bad idea. So basically, I'm just making them as nice as humanly possible, and then we're basically going to pre-lube them up, put them in place, and kind of get them resting in situ. And as you can see here, the driver's side looks pretty darn good. So as you can see, these are obviously not in time just yet. These flats are not aligned with each other, but that is okay. I've just got these kind of not even finger tight just to stop them from falling. But when it comes time to actually do the timing, that's where the special tool comes in to make sure that these are aligned properly. You gotta make sure that these are locked down to tie the sprocket to the cam itself. But again, for now, these are just kind of resting in place, if you will, and we're gonna move on to doing the passenger side. All right, and we've got it done. So this is a momentous occasion, having the cams back in. Obviously, again, not in time, but at least in place. We're starting to put parts back in the car, which is a great feeling. It's starting to look like a potentially serviceable motor again. Look at that. So that's where we're gonna wrap up for today. Hopefully over the holiday weekend here, I'll be able to come back in, do some more sessions on it, hopefully get this thing all timed up, get everything ready, and hopefully get that maybe front timing cover on, stuff like that. So if you've been following this build, please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're this far in, you're probably liking it, and it would make just a lot of sense to do that. If you really like this build, definitely hit that bell notification icon as well, because that way you'll get notified every time we release a new video. And of course, if you really, really like us, definitely check us out on Patreon. We really, really appreciate your guys' support over there. It really helps us do more and more with these builds and help us bring you more content. So thank you, and we will catch you on the next one.